Hey everybody. So, I made a recent video and I kind of fell into the anger tunnel as one of my viewers pointed out. I want to thank that viewer for having the presence of mind to realize that I was simply angry. And so as a result of that, thank you. That said, a lot of you chose to just make negative comments and dunk on people because you didn't understand what was actually going on. I understand a lot of you may not be professional developers, and so you may not have the experience that some of the other people who commented do. But just to make things clear, there is a lot going on with the Rust compiler. It does a lot of checks, and it's extremely paranoid in ways that a lot of developers just don't like when it comes to that tight development loop. One of the big issues with the Rust compiler is that it does a lot of checks because it wants to be completely done with compilation, but it doesn't like to cache that state. This is the problem. As another viewer pointed out, there is a cache issue here. The compiler cache is simply not being respected. It's not being generated the first time, and when things change, it's basically invalidating huge blocks of the cache in ways that it shouldn't because maybe not necessarily all that code needs to change. That's fine. It's important that we stay positive, and maybe I failed here, but we should definitely try to be together as a community and understand that if the problem is there and somebody's complaining about it, that's the opportunity to work on a solution. In this case, some people decided that they wanted to, let's just say they want to be negative about the operating system and the use of Windows, which is completely irrelevant to the entire issue because Windows has a microkernel just like everything else. And Linux actually has a kernel that is increasingly adding more and more complexity because of the drivers and stuff, which is why they're actually taking a lot of the old legacy drivers for things that work just fine and removing them from the source tree. And so, from my perspective, as somebody who's used Gentoo, Debian, Slackware since the 90s, to be clear, I don't get caught up in those operating system wars because I understand how childish they are. At the end of the day, it's about your ideological ideals and your desire to use things that work for you. If you want to use Linux, great. But if you want to flex because you use Kali Linux and not some other Linux distribution, then I just consider you to be very inexperienced with Linux. Because from my perspective, as somebody who's used Debian, Slackware, Gentoo, Red Hat, CentOS, all these things, I just consider them different versions of the same source tree. And from my perspective, most of these distributions are just rebuilders because they're the ones pulling the source code from the people who actually built it and just compiling their own version of it, which is fine. That's what choice is. That's what open source is. But if you come to me and you say, oh, I suck because I use Windows, that's a non starter. And it's not going to get me to want to talk to you. Because from my perspective, as somebody who's used Linux basically since the 90s, and as somebody who's actually worked in Redmond, I have a unique perspective. And so, because I've got both sides of the coin, I understand that a coin does not only have two sides, it has three. There's heads, tails, and the edge that it sometimes lands on and surprises us all. So, try to keep things positive, and thank you for pushing back and calling me out if you think I don't know something. But make sure you actually have the data to back it up before you make that claim. Thanks.